Good evening. My name is Young Kim, and I'm a professor of higher education at Azusa Pacific University. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Liz Rennick this evening. Dr. Liz Rennick is assessment and research analyst at the University of Arizona, and she was one of my first students when I newly joined this program, and she was one of my first research team members, and she was my first TA, RA, and she was my first student co-author and student co-presenter. So Dr. Rennick and I have shared so many great moments together in this program over the past several years. So definitely she is my best scholarly colleague and my best friend. So set in the context of more selective institutions, Dr. Liz Rennick's dissertation examined the patterns of college engagement among Latino transfer students and its effects on their cognitive skills development as compared to their native peers. I chaired her dissertation, and Dr. Carol Longman was a committee member, and Dr. Carol Lomberg, a professor of higher education at Cal State Fullerton, was another committee member. So I'm so proud of her, not only for her achievement in her dissertation, but also for her continuing passion and eager toward research. So now let me turn this over to you, Dr. Liz Rennick.
Thank you, Kim. That was really sweet. Okay, so title of my study was The Effects of Engagement on Cognitive Skills Development Among Latino Transfer Students at Selected Four-Year Universities, a comparison to their native peers. I know that just looks like a whole bunch of words thrown together, so I think I need to explain just a couple of things to you. So what do I mean by some of these words? So transfer students and native students, there are essentially two pathways to attaining a bachelor's degree. One of them is by enrolling in college right after high school, so that's what I refer to as a native student. And then the other pathway is by attending a community college for the first 2 years of coursework, and then transferring to a four-year institution where you can earn your bachelor's degree. So that's what I mean by transfer and native students. And there are some qualitative differences between transfer and native students. And for one thing, transfer students tend to be a little bit older. They tend to have more work and family responsibilities. They tend to attend college part-time. And so once they enter the four-year institution after transferring, they tend to be older. And we also know that transfer students tend to have some difficulty when they transfer to the four-year institution in terms of their academic and social adjustment. And then by selected institutions, I just mean that more competitive institutions where students are, these institutions select only a few students compared to all of those who apply. And then by engagement, I just mean those meaningful activities that students engage in that are empirically related to college outcomes. And one of those college outcomes for Latino college students is cognitive skills development. And it's been shown in the literature and previous research that I've done with Kim, in fact, that Latinos do benefit from their engagement in terms of their cognitive skills development. However, we don't know anything about how transfer students experience engagement or how that engagement is related to their cognitive skills development. And so that's what I wanted to find out with this study. And the reason I was interested in it is because I myself graduated from a community college, and there I am. And I also transferred and I got my bachelor's degree. So here's the purpose of my study, and I already explained that a little bit, so I won't go into that. But I used the 2012 administration of the National Survey of Student Engagement, and my sample included 968 seniors, and that was from over 100 institutions all across the United States. And then, as you can see, the sample that I had included 71% transfer students, which is pretty big. And then, like I said, there were some qualitative differences between transfer students and native students, and we can see that transfer students tended to be more likely to be first-generation college students, and they also tended to be older, 24 or older, compared to their native peers who were much younger. And so what did I find from my study? I did find that transfer students did experience college in ways that were different from their native peers in terms of their engagement. And what I did find is that the engagement that they tended to have more of was that type of engagement that occurred within the classroom, whereas native students tended to engage in those activities that occurred outside of the classroom. And so we do see that that transfer students do experience college uniquely compared to their native peers. And then I wanted to know what were the effects of engagement on cognitive skills development. And I did find some unique differences as well as some similarities, but I just wanted to share the most important thing with you. And to conduct this, this analysis, I used a hierarchical multiple regression analysis, which really allowed me to isolate the effects of engagement above and beyond the effects of any background characteristics or institutional characteristics or any other types of college experiences. And so what I found was that the variables in the model explained between 45 and 48% of the variance in cognitive skills development. And almost all of that variance could be attributed to engagement and not their background characteristics and so forth. And then we did find that transfer students tended to benefit from their interaction with faculty in terms of their cognitive skills development. And native students did not appear to benefit in terms of their cognitive skills development. And I thought this was really interesting because previous research has shown that Latino students in general have benefited from their faculty interaction in terms of cognitive skills development. And because I disaggregated the data by native and transfer students, we could now see that transfer students benefited while native students didn't seem to. And then I also found that native students tended to benefit from other types of engagement. Okay, so I think the key implication from this study, on top of other theoretical and research and practical implications, was that the findings demonstrated the critical need to disaggregate the data by transfer status. I think in past studies, Latino students have typically not been disaggregated by their transfer status, and what we're finding in the literature is that a high proportion of all Latino students in higher education are actually transfer students, so it's really important to disaggregate that data. And then this study contributed to the literature in several significant ways. It was the first study to examine the patterns of engagement between Latino transfer and native students using Ku's engagement framework. And then we did find that there were some unique experiences in terms of their engagement. And then it was the first study to study the effects of engagement among Latino transfer students at selective institutions. And then it was important because it really solidified the importance of engagement to their cognitive skills development. So that was my study in a nutshell. So that was really hard to put years of work into 7 minutes. Thank you. Oh, yeah. I get to say thank you to a few people. First of all, for my family who is all here today, thank you so much for being here. It really means a lot to me. Especially those who came from out of state, my mother and father-in-law and my best friends from Washington and from Virginia, so thank you for coming. And then even those of you who are in LA and battled that traffic today, thank you for being here. And also my committee members, Dr. Karen Longman, thank you so much for your input. I mean, you really challenged me and you helped make my final dissertation really something that I'm proud of, so thank you. And also, Dr. Kim, your words just floored me earlier, so thank you so much for that. But also, thank you for being such a role model in terms of excellence in research and teaching. And to all the other faculty that are here today, thank you, Lori, Eileen. I don't know if there's any others here. The rest are upstairs, but thank you so much for making this experience just something that changed me completely. And I know my family probably can see it, but it did, so for the better. Thank you. Thank you.
So our next presentation is going to be from Dr. Matthew Vetter. And so he was in the 2014 cohort. Added up, that's 4 years. Okay, so for our students who wonder, can it be done in 4 years? The answer is yes. You do have a role model for that. And Matthew was my research assistant on my research team and has been a great colleague, and I've so enjoyed working with him. He's the Director of Leadership and Involvement at Denison University, and his study has been on that quality versus quantity of involvement with college students. And I feel like his study has something important to offer to our students, but also to higher education as we begin to explore what is it about campus involvement that really makes a difference. So Dr. Vetter, the floor is yours.
So when I started this dissertation and even this program, I started with the question of wanting to know what makes students thrive during college. What type of experiences matter? Thank you. Yeah, there we go. What type of experiences matter, and how do different types of students engage in those experiences in ways that make them get the most of their college experience? And in my work at Denison University, I do spend a lot of my time on the ways that students engage outside of the classroom. That co-curricular involvement is those activities, those events, those programs that students go to outside of class. So this is an example of one of those type of experiences. This is a meeting between two student organizations, the Denison Feminist and the Denison Muslim Student Association, having a conversation about the role of women in Islam in contemporary society. And so in my role at Denison and in my research, I think a lot about how can we create more experiences like this for students, or how can we get students to go to more events like these to get the most out of their college and to learn more from their college experience. And really, this is what the research tells us that we should be doing in higher education. We should be telling students to go to more of these activities, to go more outside of classroom and inside the classroom. But what I also know from working with students is that students also come to me telling me how stressed they are with projects, and we also know from research that students today are more overwhelmed than they've ever been before. And so what this creates is a situation where students don't have time to go to all these programs, and I start to wonder when I read the literature if maybe we're not looking at the outcomes of these involvement experience holistically. Maybe we should be looking at things in a little different way. And so two gaps have kind of emerged in the literature. One is that we need to do more to look at both the quality and the quantity or the frequency of students' involvement. And we also need to have a bigger picture about how we assess those experiences and maybe look more holistically about how students learn in college. And that was the research questions I approached to my dissertation. How do the quality and quantity of co-curricular involvement affect a model of student thriving? And student thriving was the conceptual framework for my study. So Dr. Schreiner has done a lot of research on thriving. It's a way to conceptualize student success as holistically encompassing the academic, the social, and the emotional characteristics of the student's experience. It's measured quantitatively through a survey with 5 subscales that try to encompass as much as we can about the student experience. So for my study, we assessed students at nearly 3,000 students at 13 different institutions, and we used a statistical technique called structural equation modeling that we tried to predict the extent to which students would thrive in college. So we're trying to predict thriving We had a number of variables that I used about the ways that students engage in college, their behaviors. Of course, the key characteristics of quality and quantity were measured in the surveys. And then a number of variables about how they engage with faculty and their satisfaction with that. And then there some variables that looked at how they engage in community and their sources of meaning in that community. So we put this into a model where each of these arrows are a hypothesized relationship. And then through the statistical analysis, we refine that to see what is actually significant. So now each of these arrows is an actual significant pathway towards thriving. I'm not going to go over all of this today, so I'm just going to highlight a couple for you. The first is that quantity of involvement does not by itself directly predict thriving. So the more frequently you show up to activities and programs on campus does not necessarily lead to thriving. But what we do know is that if you show up to those activities, maybe you're more likely to interact with faculty. And we have known for years in the literature that faculty engagement does lead to success in college. Doing things like having a student organization advisor or having a faculty panelist at your organization meetings could be ways that students can get more out of their college experience. The next thing we found was that quality of involvement was directly predictive of thriving. And this is important to know that the ways that students engage in these organizations, that they're really psychologically invested, they get more out of their experiences. They're not just showing up, but they're really investing in the relationships in those organizations or those communities. That's what really contributes to their success in college from a holistic perspective. And so that, they not only are getting more from their academic experience, but they're connecting more with their peers. They're getting that academic, emotional, and social contributions to their learning in college. So let's look at this picture again. In this picture, you can see someone who's asleep. You can see someone that's on their laptop, someone that's eating their dinner, someone with closed body language. But you can also see someone that's contributing to the conversation, someone that has a different perspective, someone that is actively engaged and wanting to learn more about the topic. And I think this really captures, in a nutshell, what my dissertation is about, that students can learn from these experiences, but they have to do it, and they have to be invested in these experiences to do so. And so when we try to create involvement experiences outside the classroom, we have to create them in ways that are really encouraging students to engage deeply. So from this study, what we can do as practitioners and researchers is encourage students to engage deeply in their involvement outside the classroom, not just to show up, but choose one or two organizations or leadership roles and really try to get the most out of those experiences. We need to promote the type of co-curricular pathways that matter for students, and whether those are through faculty or through co-curricular experiences, highlight those and encourage students to follow those paths. Encourage faculty to engage more outside the classroom so that those frequency involvement can make a difference when faculty are engaged. And then foster deeper connections to campus for students so that they can really thrive while they're in college. So thank you for your time today, and just a couple additional thank yous. First of all, to my committee and Lori for being there all along this journey, and John Dugan and Eric McIntosh, who are not here today, for really helping me through this. Obviously, my wife, Monica, who's been a part of this journey for 4 years. Could not have done it without you, and thank you so much. My family, who's pictured here, who have also been cheerleaders, in addition to my in-laws who are watching from home, and to my work colleagues, pictured here, and former supervisor Natalie, who inspired a lot of this research through her thoughts and critiques. And then finally, my dogs, one who was rested on my feet for 100 pages or so of this dissertation, but is no longer with us today. And the latest addition, who's probably should not be on the thank you page, but I love him nonetheless. But thank you all.
So our next presentation is Dr. Brian Jaworski, who was in the 2013 cohort. He is the Dean of Students at Huntington University. He was also on my research team, and I remember as I first got to know Brian, how eager he was to do an intervention study. And I'm like, are you sure you want to do an intervention study? All right, let's do it. And I so appreciate the tenacity and the initiative and the ways that Brian has really made this come to life. So Dr. Brian Jaworski.
So we'll be timely here. Thriving in residence life, the impact of a positive psychology intervention with resident assistants. From 2002 to 2012, there was a 24% increase in full-time college students, but yet still less than 50% graduate within 5 years across all institution types. So those that are able to graduate college are often riddled with college debt due to the continual cost, the rise of the cost of attendance. And living on campus only adds to that cost. And so it leaves housing administrators such as myself needing to justify why living on campus matters and what it contributes to. So could the work of residence life staff, and specifically the work of resident assistants, help more students experience success and thrive within the college environment of the residence hall kind of facilities? With 60,000 RAs serving on 2,100 campuses, I felt that they were an untapped resource to help their fellow students thrive and experience success in college. So this dissertation study provides an RA-led intervention designed to help those students who live within residence hall facilities experience greater levels of thriving and success in college. So Dr. Schreiner's thriving concept that you see Matthew talked previously served as a conceptual framework, in part because it demonstrated pathways to thriving and success and offered the RA's goals at and the development of their residential programs. So this is my first attempt at an experimental design research study with random assignment to really understand if the RA could, after attending this intervention training, develop residential programs for their students to experience and participate in, and those students served as the treatment group. The students whose RAs did not attend the training served as the control group. The thriving quotient was administered at the beginning and the end of the fall semester, and a multivariate analysis of covariance was utilized to determine if this intervention at the beginning of the fall semester had any semester-long impact. And unfortunately, the answer is no, but there is good news coming, all right? So one of the desires of the study was to see if the RA relationship, as well as students' perception of residential programming, could contribute to thriving. So a hierarchical multiple regression analysis was conducted to address this research question. So in accordance with other studies on thriving and based on kind of the student experience, 13 variables were entered into 8 different models. And you see here, overall, the full model experience explained 51.3% of the variation in thriving for students who participated in this study. And the R-squared change column refers to the percentage of the improvement of the model when that variable was entered into it. So you see the nice little stars there. If you think of it kind of in percentage points, they're all starred except for that grouping variable, which was the control treatment, which, given the results of the Mancova, was all not that surprising, but I just wanted to be thorough. So although the full model explained 51.3% of the variation in thriving, it was these specific variables that contributed to that variation, as the beta weights help us understand the contributing strength of each one of these variables. So in the end, the significant variables in my study included psychological sense of community, institutional integrity, which was kind of the perceptions of faculty, staff, administrators that help fulfill the institutional mission, spirituality, faculty, and then for the first time ever, a brand new pathway to thriving was revealed in RA programming. The RA programming here in this regression analysis was a composite variable consisting of 5 questions. So did the RA plan programs? Did the student attend them? Did they help academically, help socially, and kind of help overall? So wanting to get below due to the newness of this variable, I wanted to get below the surface of the composite variable. So I conducted a secondary regression analysis. And this really brought to light the contributing strength that RA programs, and specifically the RA programs that kind of contribute to kind of that social belonging, that social connectedness, that psychological sense of community has to thriving. So it actually changed the order of the beta weight. So before, RA programs were the 5th strongest contributor to thriving, and the secondary regression analysis became the 3rd strongest contributor to thriving and actually improved model fit slightly. So what does this all mean to the rest of us in the room? For me, I think it all comes down to RA programming, and specifically, again, to those programs that where a student can participate in and experience that, again, that psychological sense of community, right? So research have identified 4 key areas of psychological sense of community: membership, influence, integration and fulfillment of needs, and shared emotional connections. So those that work with our RAs, kind of helping them experience through the residential program, linking theory to practice from something like psychological sense of community into when they attend one of these programs contribute in some small way to experience a student experiencing psychological sense of community. So helping RAs kind of move past the kind of casual facilitation that can be kind of characterized, the kind of RA social programming, right? Pizza and Oreos and those types of things. So ones that are designed with intention and purpose and are linked back to theory that we can know that help students really thrive within the college environment. And I think in a time, right, when institutions are searching for ways to increase student success, when we have 60,000 RAs serving on 2,100 campuses, the opportunity to impact thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students is certainly there. So thank you for your time. And that was the fastest I've ever done that. So yeah, thank you. So let me get to some thank yous. You know, if any of you know Dr. Schreiner, she spends her career on the topic of student success. But until you're probably like Matthew and I in that phase of like, I'm not sure what in the world I'm doing, she lives it out in ways that probably few of us ever really experienced. So it's not just theoretical to her, but from voicemails I would get on vacation to just the amount of work that she puts into this is, so it's been my high privilege to study with you, so thank you. For Doctors McIntosh and Sriram for their invaluable support and assessment encouragement along the way. They were incredible to work with and provided lots and lots of encouragement along the way. For my site, which was Kansas State University, we called this place home for 5 years. So to any of my Wildcats watching, thank you for the opportunity to give back to you. It was really great to go back to the hall that we used to live in and where 2 of my kiddos were born to help them do this. And so Baker's Dozen cohort, I know most of them are upstairs watching my other friends, but that's okay. I will not hold that against you. You know, it's always hard to leave home for 2 weeks, but then to walk away and you walk away with some great friendships. And for the people that walked through 790, for Brandon, Neil, Mike, my roommate James, for all intensives, that was just some really great friends. So to Team Jaws, yeah, I wasn't going to cry. It's always tough to win. My parents and my wife giving me cognitive space to complete this program. I would also like to thank my adopted a member of Team JAWS, which is Abby Blankenship. She helped kind of the initial process of thriving in residence life and what it means, and provided lots of support in thinking through this topic. And so here is to dissertation-free weekends, right, kiddos? And Disneyland, right? So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Karen Longman, and you can tell that for the faculty and the students, there's a lot of pride, a lot of joy, and quite a bit of relief to be here tonight. So I have the privilege of introducing our next 2 students. Dr. Kim Ladd comes up first. One of my thoughts for Kim is that when you're a highly curious person, it's very hard to get a dissertation done because everything is so interesting. So Kim, part of our doctoral program, takes the students around the world to introduce them to international higher ed policy. And Kim went to London with us, then went to Finland with us, and then went to Australia, and somehow along the way did her coursework and finished a dissertation. But she is a highly curious person, and I just want to acknowledge Eileen Holm, who's here in the back there. Kim, if you put Kim and Eileen together, they're probably the 2 most curious people on the planet. Kim was on Eileen's research team and helped with an ongoing project that Eileen has been involved with. So Eileen was her content expert and a guide at the side on the substance of her research. And Dr. Michelle Lewis over here served as our third member and did the lion's share of work on chapters 1 to 3. So thank you very much for that. So it's a fascinating study, and we'll turn it over to Kim for 7 minutes and hear what you did and what you found. Welcome.
All right, so good to be here. Nice. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. So yeah, highly curious. So let's see if at the end of this 7 minutes, you'll be a little more curious yourself, okay? Title, The Experiences of Students Who Increased Curiosity During Their First Year of College, a grounded theory study, which I'll let you know what that is if you're unsure. The problem that I sought to address in higher education was the issue of decreased levels of engagement in learning in particular, which is what those of us that spend our lives in higher ed are all about, student learning. And just a couple that I'll reference. There was a Gallup-Purdue index in 2013 that looked at 30,000 graduates who claimed only 6% of them that they had been highly, highly challenged in their undergraduate experience. Also another, the NESE, the 2015 report showed that roughly a little over 50%, I believe it was 54%, of students said that they were involved and engaged in deep learning. Deep learning defined as not surface learning, but actually absorbing oneself and learning. And then at the same time, roughly, institutions of higher education have become increasingly accountable for this learning that is or is not going on in our institutions of higher ed. So that was the problem that I sought to try to understand what's going on. And there's a lot of literature, okay, about in that first piece, what is that, a hexagon on the left, about 30 years worth of discussion in the literature regarding higher education student engagement. Followed by some very interesting study. You'll recognize some names such as Schreiner and Lewis and Pothoven and Nelson. McIntosh was just named as well. Studies looking at the psychological factors that underline student success behaviors, one of which is engagement. But looking at, I love to hear Laurie say, I just want to understand what actually is going on in their heads that causes these behaviors. And I love that going on in their heads piece because that is a great way to put it. It surfaced that certain non-cognitive variables, Michelle did not like that term non-cognitive because one could argue that curiosity is very cognitive. I could argue that, but certain variables started to emerge that weren't the traditional cognitive types of things we look at in student engagement. And consequently, or maybe just over the last half of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, lots of theoretical models looking at curiosity as a construct that contributes greatly to student engagement. I was on Eileen's research team, as Karen mentioned, and we I think I was on that team about 4 years. It was only required that you spend, I think, 1 semester or 2 semesters, but they couldn't get me off that team. I had so much fun. So non-cognitive influence, particularly curiosity, has emerged in multiple studies, a couple of which I had the privilege to be part of before the dissertation started. So my research question was, how do students develop increased curiosity during their first year of college? So, people are curious, some are, arrive at the university, at the institution curious, and some more curious than others, but the ones I studied were those who increased their curiosity during that first year. My methodology was classic grounded theory, which required that I actually develop a theoretical model to explain my findings and what we found in the research question. I actually started with 530 students who I administered the Curiosity and Exploration Inventory developed by Cashdown et al. In 2009 and used that to determine levels of curiosity in a group of first-year students. Then I gave it again gave that in August, and then gave the survey again right before the break in December, and then again in April, okay? And then compared their levels of increase in curiosity, and the top 10% of increase in that first year group, I actually got to interview and find out what happened to you. What were your experiences that made you curiouser and curiouser? It was really, really, really interesting to do, I must say. What I found was that these extremely, not necessarily extremely curious, but those who had increased curiosity, responded to first year conditions by questioning their assumptions, and they desired to be challenged, which resulted in great absorption in learning, okay? This is the model, the theoretical model that I developed. Their conditions were the same. All first-year students in this study, and most first-year students all over the country and the world for that matter, experience newness, uncertainty, adversity, and complexity. But they responded differently. The kids who increased curiosity in this study responded to these kind of ordinary conditions with a great desire to explore opportunities, with a desire to be challenged. They saw failure and adversity as an opportunity for growth, and they also questioned everything, their beliefs, their assumptions, and so on. All at the same time, they were absorbing themselves in learning that they had not, this self-report, but they had not seen themselves do before, drawn into the objects of their interest. Limitations of the study were, of course, I was at one institution that was a faith-based institution. That may have been a factor, I think. There may have been, they were mostly female, 13 of the 15 that I studied were female. Implications, though, for study relate back to the model itself. So I'll just go right back here. The thing that I think for higher education that we simply have to start to do is to ourselves explore opportunities, model it, not only present these opportunities to our students, but value them. We also need to be challenged ourselves, not this, take the easy way in whatever endeavor we have, but actually to be challenged. And then see failure as not necessarily a setback, but as something that is a way to learn, a pathway to learn, and question things. One of my students said that it's actually everything that you think you should not be questioning that you need to question. And that was, to me, one of the most kind of telling quotes for what exactly it is to be curious and why it's so important. It pulls you in. So stay curious, you guys. Just a few thoughts about thank yous. First of all, Karen, my goodness gracious, the chair par excellence right there. I thank you. I have a visual in my mind of one of those trips to Australia with Eileen and Laurie. I don't know how I got on that deal. That was great. We presented at the University of Finland, and I was just basking in the intellectual power that I was surrounded by with those three. It was amazing. But I must say that was kind of the genesis of deciding on this topic. I have a napkin that is buried somewhere in the mess of my house that's emerged or been created since I started this, but a cocktail napkin where Karen asked so innocently of the bartender, may we have some nibbles to go with our, and if you know Karen, that's just, yeah, you get it, right? I mean, that was so funny. We laughed and laughed. But on that napkin at that bar that night in Sydney, I sketched out this whole curiosity thing and invited Karen and Eileen to be part of this team. Michelle, I thank you for being so patient and just so dang good at what you do. Just amazing editor along with Karen, and you guys just allow me to be curious. I want to also thank my parents, Ken Sedeth and May Teague, who my dad, extremely curious, my mom put up with it, and allowed me to be the curious kid that I have grown up to be the curious adult, and hopefully will, always be curious. and to my husband, Tim, who understands my mom's pain and also allows me to continue to be curious for 33 years. Our sweet daughter, my wild cherub, I like to call her, was probably or is the most curious kid I've ever known, and excited about her future as that goes. So, have I covered everything? I do believe. I hope I have. Okay, so nice to be here tonight. Thank you.
So, Dr. Kim Ladd, proud of you. Your last slide said, stay curious. So, we will be curious and stay there. Okay. So, Dr. Lucas Rux is our last speaker this evening, and a person, Lucas, where are you? Yeah, so proud of this fellow, both in terms of tenacity, but also the reason that he got into this research, which was trying to understand what motivated women in very large public institutions to choose to run and then to actually achieve the presidency of the student government, which is a very rare phenomenon. And so much I could say about that, but my own research interest looks at women's leadership and motivation to lead and barriers to women's leadership. So for Lucas to take this on, in part, I think, because of your daughter and his years of service and student development. Again, Dr. Eileen Holm was the methodologist, and just, I don't know, dozens, if not hundreds of hours working with the data and being sure that what you were seeing was accurate with your participants. And then Dr. Glenn Smith, who's a friend out in the Portland area, served as a content expert and a student development colleague on the committee. So Lucas, we've got 7 minutes. Help us understand what motivated these women and what we should know from your research.
Very briefly, what we know. For the last 30 years, women have been outperforming their men counterparts in the university, the traditional college situation, by just about every measure: GPA, degree attainment, interaction, activity, engagement, and that's the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. One of those areas, as Karen alluded to, they don't participate at the highest form of elected leadership service. They certainly are engaged in service activities. They're probably doing much more good than their male counterparts, but they're not at that top level where they can affect the most change. Certainly we know that the college setting is an ideal place for leadership development, communication development, finding your own style. And if you look across the nation, several of our institutions have leadership development or a component in their mission statement. This also does relate to corporate America, public and private sector, Fortune 500 companies. We understand that there was a couple great studies that we'll get to. 2013, the types of leadership qualities that we want to work for. What do you see in a good leader? And then in 2015, we connected that to organizational health. Diverse leadership teams at the top level do make for a healthy organization. And finally, the pipeline problem that Karen alluded to. When we look at the U.S. News and World Report, our top 50 ranking institutions in our country, less than a third of those still today are women presidents. And it's not because they're losing the race, it's because they're not even choosing to run. They truly don't have the motivation to seek the president position. So lots of personal bias we'll get into and my own curiosities, but that's kind of where I started with my research. Really briefly about the qualitative study. This was a grounded theory study. I visited 10 university campuses where these women serve as student body president. I did this in December of 2017. The 10 interviews ranged from 48 to 68 minutes. We had 11 questions in a semi-structured interview, and then Eileen and I had developed 5 or 6 probing follow-up questions just in case, but in a semi-structured interview, you really allow the data, the interview responses to kind of guide where you're going, and so that's what we did. A little bit more about these women. Pseudonym there, A through J, the 10 participants. My favorite 6-year-old in the room who's sleeping already would be curious to know that I did name one Cambria and one Isabella, and she's still sleeping. a couple things here about, I was intentional about what we selected here. The women you'll see, I was looking for 18 to 22-year-olds. A couple things. I wanted to avoid, I'm very interested in formative experiences and outside things, but I wanted to make sure that a community college transfer didn't impact a career for our non-traditional student, wasn't impacting some of these beliefs or motivations towards the top leadership role. And so I narrowed for 18 to 22-year-olds. I wanted traditional first-year college students moving through a 4-year program. I thought it was interesting, talk about my own bias. I was expecting all 10 to be some kind of business administration, and they weren't, as you can see there. There was a variety of fields, and I don't think that degree major impacted them very much. And again, I'm thinking that business or some kind of administrative degree would have leadership development qualities inside the curriculum, which is why I was curious about that. College size, another thing that was intentional. Students attended universities publicly funded. I wanted to make sure there wasn't other dynamics, a faith-based institution or a for-profit. It wasn't a community college with a little different regional message in their mission. These were all publicly funded universities, ranging from 5,100 up to 48,000 students. And then I was looking for some of those early college experiences, and you can see there was a good variety of cultural clubs, some career-focused clubs. There was a lot of service within the social clubs that the women participated in. What did I learn? I really was after motivation to lead. Why did you think you would be successful? Why did you run? Why did you want to lead from the top position? And one of the beauties of qualitative research, we follow the data. It doesn't go the way you think. You don't box yourself in. And certainly I acknowledge my own bias, but the women continue to talk about before they would consider even running, they weren't worried about losing the race at all. They wanted to make sure they were qualified, that they had demonstrated success. They had been encouraged by others to seek this position. There was never a mention about resume building or what this will get me, or any kind of a status symbol. It was, I can do good and I have shown that I'm capable of leading. That was kind of the biggest takeaway for me. Certainly there was a very interconnected web of things that led to the model that we'll get to next. Thank you. I wanted to make sure we define this too. Leadership efficacy, it really is central to this. The belief that they were going to be successful, that's what really fed into that motivation piece. And it's important to note, I didn't start off with this in the literature review, but Bandura in 1997 talked about self-efficacy, believing that you could control part of the outcome through some organization, some intentional effort within a context or a situation. And so you'll see mastery experiences, verbal persuasion, and vicarious learning. That does come from his work in 1997. My model really does expand. I'm looking at leadership efficacy and the increase of that. And part of this interconnected web that I've defined here for you, it doesn't really go in that straight line. It certainly started with the early college experiences, but it didn't matter what they were. They had the opportunity to find and demonstrate their own leadership success. They found very specific words of encouragement. And for good or bad, they saw leadership examples in their administration and then in other clubs and activities. All those things helped them find places where they could serve, their responsibility, areas of passion, and that also, the power of serving others gave them resiliency and allowed them to overcome some of the social barriers and other things that have been researched as far as attaining leadership for women. So what do we do now that we understand this? Just a couple really brief things here. First year curriculum, scaffolding services, and leadership opportunities. A couple good recommendations. I think a lot of times in our first year experiences, we talk about clubs and activities and ways to get students engaged. If you're in a mountain biking club, we don't focus on the treasury or the leadership role of the club. We talk about mountain biking. And so you're finding a sense of community, but you're not thinking about the leadership development role. So be more intentional about that. The interaction of clubs, again, it didn't matter what type of clubs the students were in. It was the identification of leadership styles that worked and that didn't work because they thought, hey, I can do this. Maybe I could be better at this than this person who's leading. And the second group, very, very quickly, specific words of affirmation. Talking about the college mission, what can we be doing, what are we not doing well, some of those difficult conversations, but specifically identifying the skills that were done within that leadership context. Not just you did a good job, but I like the way you handled this group, I like the way you led this. When women identified that, it gave them encouragement to seek a higher leadership role. Thank you. The 7 minutes does go very fast. Just really quickly, I want to acknowledge the 10 women that were very kind with their time and allowing me to visit their home campus right before Christmas break. My committee, certainly, Dr. Longman, Dr. Holm, August to April, really, this took me too long, but from August to April, the encouragement, the feedback, the nudging, I needed it, and we got it done. Certainly, Lori, I so appreciated the program. The coursework here was excellent. I've shared some of that with you already. I have appreciated the program and all the classes I took here. My cohort, Dr. Dave Edens, is here. Again, August to April, Dave put me on a check-in system, and I had to text him every Friday with things that I had done to get closer to the goal, and I appreciate that. My cohort, I don't live in the LA area, and they've always opened their home to me, and I had a good experience here. My family, this was one of those, we're going to do it now before Braden goes to soccer, or we're not going to do this for 20 years until Braden's out of school. And you can tell that Braden has a brother and a sister now. And we're way past under 5 soccer there. And so my wife for sticking with me on this process. And we've had a lot of exciting successes and challenges, and I just appreciate you. I appreciate the support system. My wife and I, we moved our family 1,000 miles away. So for you new students, I have a whole list of things not to do while you're finishing the dissertation. So, thank you.
So thanks to each one of you for the good work that you've done and the presentation that you've given. It's always a challenge when we're trying to do an upstairs, downstairs, and upstairs is running a little behind. So it's not a race, but if it were, we would have won. So I would suggest that you can purposefully but casually take a restroom break. We're going to actually place some staff at the stairs because we don't want to interrupt the presentations upstairs. So we'll give you a heads up when things are clear up there. But thank you so much for being here, and you can take a little break till we move upstairs for the hooding.